Let's look at the difference between direct versus indirect costs. The difference between these types of costs or cost classifications has to do with how easy the costs are traced to the cost object. Why we need to analyze direct costs and indirect costs is that we as management would want to know, say, what is the estimated cost of an cost object so we know how to price it, for instance. The direct costs are easy in that they are easy to trace to a specific cost object. Examples would be the material that goes directly into a product. In other words, you can see where that wood went, or the metal, or whatever the material is that goes into a product. Another would be direct labor, where you have some people who are working solely on that cost object, and you can figure out how much the cost is based on how many hours of direct labor went into that particular cost object. There are, however, some costs that are not easy to trace. Those include things like indirect materials, indirect labor, or overhead. Examples of indirect materials are things that go into a product but are either in such small amounts that it wouldn't be cost effective to try to identify or trace each item directly to a cost object, so they get lumped together and people just sort of use it freely. The indirect labor is where you have people or costs that are shared by many cost objects. You have, for instance, maintenance engineers who will oversee many different cost objects. So we have to figure out a way to trace some amount of the engineer's salary to each cost object, and we'll deal with that here shortly. Likewise, supervisors or managers or anybody that has puts time into a cost object but also into other cost objects as well. Likewise, overhead. You've got equipment that is being used by many different cost objects, so you have to figure out how much should go to one specific cost object. Along those same lines, you've got taxes, repairs, utilities. All these costs are incurred for the benefit of many cost objects, so we've got to figure out how to split that up, allocate it. Let's look at 7-1A, where I need you to identify whether a cost is direct or indirect, and I'd like you to pause and work on that. Okay, I hope you had time to get your answers. Let's compare. Wages earned by factory machine operators. Those machine operators, if they are working with just one product, it's easy to trace their time right to a product. That is not the case with the depreciation on a factory machine, because again, that's the cost of the machine that is benefiting, say, many different products. So how much of the machine's use should you allocate to this one particular cost object versus another? Salaries earned by quality control inspectors, that's the indirect labor, and that would be an indirect cost. Likewise, utilities used in the factory, that's an overhead that needs to be allocated. In the next section, we will talk about how you allocate these indirect costs to each cost object.